Hi guys, I'm going to be talking about the resources for sexuality and socioeconomic status. I'll start with the resources on sexuality. For this topic, I listened to two different episodes of Playing with Research in Health and Physical Education. And in the first episode, number 9, Risto Martinton interviewed Dylan Landy about his research on queer men in PE. And in the podcast, Landy gives an overview of his research where he basically embedded himself in the lives of his students, which was a focus of 11 queer male students who were between the ages of 15 and 17. And he just kind of tried to figure out what the role of assembling the queer body and queer desires were for these students. The podcast summarizes his paper called Queer Men, Affect and Physical Education, and it just gives us a deeper insight into the ways that the environment that we're creating in PE can shape but also restrict queer bodies and sexuality. And at the end of the podcast, Landy calls for a radical change, not only in dealing with our queer students, but also with all of our students in PE. And he focuses on the importance of our role as a teacher to provide for their effective domain. And Landy also suggests that we as a field need to be more purposeful about teaching our students about social inequality and injustices through physical activity. And then the second podcast is episode 119, which focuses on pre-service teachers and how they perceived their interactions before, during, and then in the future with LGBTQ students. The research basically goes through, it was interviews with teachers, and it summarizes a few specific ways that we can better ourselves and better prepare our pre-service teachers for meaningful ways to interact with our LGBTQ students. So that means providing better professional development, which I think we all can agree on, using an activist approach, and even something as simple as just proper pronoun use with our students. So like Landy, the authors or the speakers, McAfee and Fletcher, challenge the use of traditional sport method, and they recommend focusing on social and emotional learning that can be supported through physical activity. And they're really hopeful that this research is going to continue to just help us be more inclusive with our students. The last resource for this was an article by McCountry about sexuality sensitive schooling. So this article breaks down different ways that gay and lesbian youth face hardships. So the author gives an overview of places in and out of school where gay and lesbian students may face trauma or bullying or what the author calls victimization. And sadly, one of the places that they discuss is PE. Most importantly, though, the article provides suggested solutions on how we can better support those students. And one of those ways was through sexuality safe schooling in physical education. I think that the article was my favorite of the resources because I feel like it really broke down ways that we can take action now in our schools, even to the point of giving like bulleted lists. And the two most meaningful things that I learned from the resources, all of these resources, were kind of discussed across the board in all three of the sexuality resources. And the first one is just the importance of knowledge and awareness. So in this particular instance, this means like taking time to truly ask and understand what our LGBTQ students are going through on a day-to-day basis at home, in school, and in their social settings. But this just isn't limited to our LGBTQ students. Just as teachers being advocates for our students. And we as teachers, we can't be advocates if we don't understand what's going on. So we need to make sure that we're educating ourselves about ways that we can support our students. The podcast and the article also really call to action a change in our field to be more inclusive. And I feel like I try to be inclusive. I feel like our department does. But to help them feel safer by being represented in our curriculum. And I know that that is not happening in my school. Just in making homosexuality a norm and talking about those things is not happening in our county. And then the second thing I found meaningful from these resources was that they mentioned a lack of research on LGBTQ issues in PE. And until I started this program, I wouldn't really think that this is a big deal. But I found that in order to create change, we need data. We need to show people that it's impacting people. We need to show those outside of our field that not understanding LGBTQ youth is impacting them in a negative way. And we need to be open to critically analyzing how we as teachers, and specifically PE teachers, are shaping what our students believe about themselves and their queer selves and their sexualities if we don't have research. So we need to be more understanding and more proactive about creating this research. And then the second topic is pretty kind of unrelated, which is socioeconomic status. So in this section, I watched 2 episodes of Crash Course Sociology, which provided an overview of the history and structure of the United States educational system. And in the first episode, it mainly focused on the positives. So why we have education and how it helps us make friends through socialization, and it discussed how our structure is a way to educate the next workforce and provide social integration. And then the second episode, number 41, talked about the polar opposite. It talked about the negatives and giving support to the belief that basically our educational system in the United States is failing and is reinforcing social inequities that we're claiming to reform. The next resource was a TED Talk by Candace Sumner, which also follows suit as she tells her story of her personal experience. She was a Black student who went to a highly funded, high-quality white school, and the difference that she is now seeing with her students who are low income in a low-quality Black school. Sumner discusses the traditions in the U.S. education and specifically introduces how we have been and continue to be doing education wrong. She challenges us to enact change by sharing resources and calls us to make our representatives and our government more aware and making our education that we call an equalizer actually equal through equal opportunities for our kids. And lastly, in that section was an article by Dangus, and it's just a great summary of all the videos, I think, together, bringing light to the impact that if you have higher income parents, schools, and community, then you have a higher quality education. And how in most cases, a lack of money at home or school means a lack of opportunity for our kids. Specifically, this article talks about the role of these disparities on physical activity. So how does having a low income or low quality school impact physical activity? And I think the 2 things that I'm taking away from this resource would be that I really need to evaluate my classroom and the material that I teach and make sure that I'm approaching students where they are, that I'm more understanding of the differences of their educational journey and not expecting everyone of all socioeconomic statuses to have the same story. Not that I don't have the same expectations, but the same story. And I know it's a little embarrassing, but I've never really made the connection of local tax dollars to school funding. I know that's how it works, but it was never really put in those words for me, which is actually hilarious because I live in the same county where I teach and I pay very low income taxes, personal property taxes, but I also get paid very low. So I would love to take a more activist approach in my community to help them understand how important that money can be for providing the proper resources for our kids. So as a teacher, I think that we're challenged pretty much every time that we look at a new resource to see it through a new lens. So for me, the podcast articles and videos this week allow me to see socioeconomic status and sexuality through a totally new lens. So as a lesbian teacher, I was challenged by the readings to be thankful that I never had to fear for my job. And now that I'm teaching, it challenges me to work even harder to create a safe space for my kids with an inclusive curriculum for all students, regardless of their sexuality. And I was also challenged in the second video, number 41, and the Dangus article to help students that have lower educational capital and are from lower socioeconomic groups by trying to explore like other ways to further their education. It talked about how some of these students have a hard time getting through and understanding the college application process. And that's just not something I ever had to worry about because both my parents went to college. So making sure that I'm helping our kids with the resources I have. We have a first generation class at our school for kids who are the first to attend college. And many of them are from low socioeconomic status. So I would love to be more proactive in my participation with that and support this group. I think it just challenges us to just look at people's stories and to understand that a lot of these kids are proud of where they come from and proud of who they are. And we need to find a way to support that in our PE class, not just worry about skills, and really make a way to help them with their effective domain. So thanks for listening, and I can't wait to listen to your videos. Have a great night.